This is sort of two presentations sort of welded together, to be honest. Part of this is about explaining to you what the iBUILD project is in a very short terms, and how the iBUILD project, which at its heart is, well, let's be blunt, is what's paying for you all. It's how this iBUILD project is connected to the much wider range of projects that exist in this space, and also what are the basic sort of the basic key points, the key tenets, the key values of the iBUILD project. But the second thread through this is about some very simple points about how universities and local authorities and other government organisations can work together. Some very simple observations from the last 4, 5, 6 years of my experience of working together with local government organisations and national government organisations. There are two threads running in parallel, and I will try to entwine the warp and the weft as best as I can. So I've titled this talk, The Scene University, How iBUILD and Related Projects Have Built Academic Governance and Industry Partnerships to Understand the Value of Infrastructure. And some of you might be wondering, why the Scene University? Some of you, I suspect, may be slightly ahead of me here. It's in contrast to the Unseen University. I was very much hoping for at least a vague ripple of recognition there, but clearly not. Andy, start the car. The Unseen University is, some of you will be familiar with the Discworld, yes, the works of Terry Pratchett. Yes, a few hands have gone up. Terry, sadly no longer with us, was an expert commentator on the vagaries of how universities operate. And the Unseen University was very much a parody of how the university is frequently seen, or at least supposed to be seen, outside of the academic world. So here is the crest of the Unseen University. For those of you whose Latin is not as good as, well, anyone's really, I don't speak Latin, but I'm reliably informed that that roughly translates as now you see it, now you don't. And the relationship between the university and the governing structures of the city were clearly outlined by Pratchett in the novel The Reaper. So the relationship between the university and the patrician, absolute ruler and nearly benevolent dictator of Ankh-Morpork, here personified of course by Tom Nolan, was a complex and subtle one. Well, we'd certainly agree with that. Our relation to the university's relationship with local and national government is often subtle. The wizards held that as servants of a higher truth, they were not subject to the mundane laws of the city. All seems jolly sensible so far. I think I could get away with this at Senate. The patricians said that indeed this was the case, but they would bloody well pay their taxes like everyone else. It was $200 per capita. If per capita was a problem, de capita could be arranged. So this is this sort of this quite old parody of this relationship between a university and its city and its local governance structures. The ivory tower on the hill that thinks deep thoughts and does dangerous experiments and doesn't really get engaged directly with the governance of the city. While I was putting this this talk together, I ran it past Richard Dawson to see what he thought, and him being a pressure aficionado suggested I actually change my job title to the Professor for the Public Misunderstanding of Infrastructure, which I thought was rather mean of him. But anyway, back to the main thing. So we perhaps might like to apply some trendy management diagrams to Pratchett's idea of the relationship between the university and the city. So here we are. We have the university on the left in purple, because purple is a nice colour, and we have the council on the other side in green, because that's also a very nice colour. No prejudice here. And we have the Vice-Chancellor at the top of the university and the Chief Executive at the top of the council. And the relationship between the university and the council has, in all honesty, actually generally been fairly active. But it's been characterised by ad hoc interactions. Very often capitalised through informal personal relationships between various people either at the university or at the council. And while these are useful and they are helpful and they've released some good projects, they do have some particular problems. Of course, there's always a formal relationship between the head of the council and the head of the university in some way, again, as characterised by Pratchett in The Reacher. So the head of the Unseen University is the Arch-Chancellor, considered an important figure and holds a seat on the Ankh-Morpork Council, although this council itself has no power either. I certainly wouldn't hold that much to be true, so I think our analogy is broken down, so I'll leave it there. But the problem with this structure, which is characterised by a ceremonial relationship at the top and ad hoc relationships further down in the structure, is that when an idea originates in one part of one of the structures, there are very few ways in which the necessary expertise can be joined together with the other structure. And what tends to happen is this idea gradually percolates its way through the university hierarchy until it finds someone who actually has the connection with the council, at which point it then percolates down through the council hierarchy until it reaches someone who can actually action that idea. And this is really not a terribly efficient way of managing the conversations between the university and the local authority. And I think what iBuild and the huge suite of projects that are related to iBuild, many of which you've seen today, many more of which you'll see tomorrow, is they are beginning to redefine this relationship between the university and both its local and national government structures, and by analogy the relationship hopefully between academia and government in terms of what we can do for you and what you can do for us. So, to move on to the iBuild project in particular, so this is the project which is at the heart of this conference. iBuild tries to push towards a broad and integrated appreciation of infrastructure. A broad and integrated appreciation of infrastructure. So the diagram that we've got here is developed from something I wrote on my whiteboard and took a picture of about 3 years ago, and Richard Dawson has spent a great deal of time working through this and updating it, and I've redrawn it for this presentation. It's about thinking about services and value, not about assets and projects. Now, in the Smart Cities theme that we had earlier, we had a very interesting explanation of investment in emergency services communication systems. And that was relayed to us as being, they ended up with cupboards full of shiny silver boxes, because people were thinking about supplying the assets and weren't thinking about supplying the services, what service is actually being provided. And you see this quite a lot with many, many pieces of infrastructure provision. We get this concentration on the assets and the projects, the concentration on, the building the bridges, laying the roads, rather than the concentration on the services that these things provide. And the second thing that iBuild is very keen on concentrating on is understanding where in the system value is created and appropriated. And those two words I've highlighted for a good reason. We're interested in value creation. We're interested in where does this value occur. And very importantly, value doesn't necessarily mean pounds, shillings and pence. The value of infrastructure is not in its ability to generate income or as a financial instrument, it's in its ability to provide the services upon which our modern urban life depends. That's what infrastructure is for, and any generation of financial value is a secondary consideration. The second word that I've highlighted there is system. And it's very much about understanding infrastructure as not just a system, but also a system of systems. So this is at the core of what iBuild is trying to do. This is important because the value should be actually calculated over the life cycle. And it's interesting to think about what the life cycle of infrastructure services are. They are immortal. We will always want to travel from A to B. We will always want to flush the toilet and watch our waste go away. We will always want to plug something into the wall and make sure that it comes on. That service is very often immortal, so thinking about things in terms of the life of the asset is not as sensible as thinking about things in terms of the life of the service. And the particular focus of iBuild, in contrast to our sister project ISIF, of which Brian Collins is here representing, in fact the principal investigator, is that what we're particularly interested in is how this manifests at the local level. It's the national importance of the local. There was a phrase which Richard coined right at the very beginning: all infrastructure is local because at the end of the day it has to go somewhere. And it's how this aggregation of local effects turns into a national picture, and how trickling down national priorities will actually affect how local infrastructure is delivered. That's what we're really interested in. Okay, so some of the work that's gone on within iBuild, a huge panoply of work. I can't possibly summarise it all, but one of these is looking at infrastructure business models. When ourselves and ISIF were awarded the money from EPSRC and ESRC, it was about infrastructure business models. How do we find new business models for infrastructure? And when you take a local focus, when you take a local delivery focus, you can start to build up a typology of business models that can be used for infrastructure. Now, this in and of itself is actually quite a radical thing. You might think a typology of business models is about as dry as the proverbial Glasgow Empire on a Tuesday night. But it isn't. It's actually a radical thing to say, because it says there is more than one way to do this. And furthermore, it says that by looking at the typology of business models, you can pick the business model which best matches what it is that you're trying to do. And so we split our business models into value creation, so where do you actually create the value in the system? What organisational structure have you got in your business model? how are you funding your business model, and how are you financing your business model. And what you can then begin to do is you can say, what is it that I'm trying to do, and what business model is best matched to what it is I'm trying to do. So you can avoid the kinds of extremely high-profile failures through things like tax increment financing that we've seen both in the UK and in the US, where entirely inappropriate funding, financing, organisation or value creation models have been used in order to deliver an infrastructure project. Other work within iBUILD has included financialisation of infrastructure and city deals. So very interesting work that's been done, some of which has been presented today, some of which will be presented tomorrow. In particular, again, it's challenging this narrative that there's a one-size-fits-all approach to actually delivering novel business and financial models for infrastructure. Different manifestations and impacts in different geographical contexts. What you do in place A will not work out the same as doing it in place B. Interestingly, despite the prevailing political narrative that we're trying to disengage the state from the provision of infrastructure, that we're trying to shrink the state, that we're trying to make this, bring in more private equity, and actually dispassionate analysis of how this has evolved is actually that the role of the state has been reinforced. The state hasn't stepped back from infrastructure at all. The role of the state has actually been reinforced, which has been necessitated by the complexity of the financial instruments that are used. And thirdly, in actual fact, many of the things that are presented as devolution are nothing of the sort. If you analyse the city deals, then in actual fact, because of the very strict rules that HMG puts in place regarding things like tax increment financing, that they don't represent radical devolution at all. They represent a very small step along an incremental devolution. We've also done a lot of work on economic evaluation of how infrastructure is provided, and this is where we are beginning to drift towards this very strong collaboration with government structures. So the work that was done by virtually everybody on the iBUILD team has fed into the Treasury's update on how you actually value infrastructure. So the document that we produced was extensively cited within a document, a piece of policy which it is obligatory for people who are delivering infrastructure to refer to before they value their piece of infrastructure. So moving away from this cold, dry and pointless cost-benefit analysis towards a much more holistic view of how you actually value your infrastructure, how you actually work out what it is you're trying to do. There are hundreds of projects that fed into iBUILD. I'm certainly not going to go through all of them. What I'm going to do is be entirely parochial and look at the ones that I was involved in. So the UI project, you heard from Katie earlier. Katie was instrumental in putting the UI project together, looking at critical materials for low carbon infrastructure. So, you know, we're predicting a rollout of electric vehicles and wind turbines. In actual fact, we've not set up the supply chains for the massive step changes in critical materials supply we're going to need to make that happen. That's fed into iBUILD. Andy Gouldson's mini Stern projects, you saw Andy Gouldston earlier today, and I believe he went through how the mini Sterns actually work. This is fed into iBUILD. Livable Cities, ISIF, our sister project, Brian Collins sat over there, all these things have fed into how iBUILD works. Each of these projects has worked very, very closely with local government, national government and other governance structures. And as we look at the new projects that are beginning to come out of iBUILD, these are another layer of reinforcement on this relationship between universities, both individually and collectively, and governments, both locally and nationally. So we're beginning to build up this suite, not only of collaborations with local authorities and government, but also an understanding of how you collaborate with local authorities and government. So at the top we have the urban living partnerships. Interestingly, you look at the urban living partnerships, they map almost exactly onto iBUILD and ISIF. Because when we put the urban living partnerships in, they were specifically said, you must have explicit and deep buy-in from your local council. And because of the way that iBUILD and ISIF works, we already had that. That was already in place. So we got the urban living partnerships. If we look at the self-healing cities, that's the robots project that I presented earlier, we're using the city as a test bed because the city understands and enthusiastically wants us to say, look what Leeds is doing, look how Leeds is ahead of the curve. And the same thing is true for all the different projects that you can see all around here, of which I'm happy to explain in more detail for you. So what we're moving towards are new relationships between the university and the city. And the first of all is we're moving from ad hoc relationships to strategic relationships. We're moving away from this idea that my mate knows a bloke who works in the council towards these actual strategic relationships where we're picking up the right things. There will still be these relationships at the top. There will always be a relationship between the Arch-Chancellor and the patrician. But we're now establishing this suite of relationships that, importantly, are at the correct level. So when an idea arises in the academic community, we know and have the communication levels whereabouts we can make that actually occur in the council. And these are two areas. Similarly, if the council has a piece of work that they need doing, they think that there's academia can help them with, they know who they're talking with at the right level in the university. And each of these relationships is not ceremonial, it's project focused. So I've been through countless memoranda of understanding and, you know, nice ribbon cutting ceremonies and all the other things between the university and the council. None of the things in the projects that we showed you, these are not ceremonial relationships. These are project-based relationships. Each relationship can be added, can be linked to a project. It can be linked to a piece of co-creation where the research needs were co-created between the university and the council, and those have been exemplified in a research proposal. There are secondments in both directions. So Tom Noland, who sat here, is seconded to Leeds University from Leeds City Council, funded by external funding. We have councils commissioning strategic research from the university. So Andy Brown, who's organised the conference today, has recently completed a piece of work for the Key Cities Network, which is a network of 21 medium-sized cities in the UK that together represent a significant proportion of the country's gross value added. And importantly, these relationships talk to this latest thing that we hear all the time about place-based, this understanding that there are no one-size-fits-all solutions and you need to match the suite of business models that are available with the particular geography in which you're trying to deliver a solution. So this is, I think, better characterises our current university local authority arrangement. And it's useful to very simply state what it is that's catalysed this new relationship. And it's generally quite simple. It's about aligning incentives. It's about both parties understanding what are the incentives on each side so that we can make sure these incentives align. So, you know, to go back to the analogy with Pratchett, most people think, or many people think outside of universities, that we have teams of boffins sat around waiting for a project to come in that we can work on. That's not true. We are as project-based as the most cutthroat company that you can think of in the world. Nothing happens in a university unless there's a project code against which you can charge it. So once you've got past those misconceptions, it's about aligning incentives. Why does the university want to help you? The university wants to help you because we now have something called the impact agenda. We are now continually exhorted to demonstrate the impact of our research, and quite rightly too. In order to demonstrate, the research councils to demonstrate to BIS or BAYS or whatever it calls itself this week, that the money they are spending on research is having an impact in the country, we are obliged to demonstrate the impact of our academic research. This is good because it means that very often we can do things at a nominal cost. If we can demonstrate what the impact is going to be, if we can demonstrate that we're going to get really good impact points out of this, it's not necessary for us to charge. From a local authority point of view, what do you get from collaborating with a university? Very often it's more appropriate that you gain a piece of strategic or tactical research from a consultancy. But there are very often occasions where you must be absolutely sure the advice you're getting is neutral and credible. And for that, you need a university. The university provides academic kudos to what it is we're trying to do. Within general public, people will still add a great deal more credence to an academic report than they might do from a report from another institution. But importantly, what you get working with universities is, we talk a lot about multidisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity. I'm going to chuck another one in. Omnidisciplinary, okay? When you begin to work with the university community, you are working with all the disciplines. We can lay our hands on any discipline that you need in order to help with the problem that you've got. So you've got a one-stop shop by working with universities. The intersection is funding. There is funding available for you to do this strategic research. There is other budgets upon which you can draw in order to get strategic research actually performed, in order to perform these pieces of consultancy that you need to move forward certain projects. And interestingly, much of this, we can't access it on our own as universities, and you can't access it on your own as local councils. And we've repeatedly demonstrated this over the last 3 or 4 years within all the various projects that collaborate with iBUILD. So that's what's in it for you. It's not a question of what can we do for you or what can you do for us. It's a question of ask both what you can do for your university and what your university can do for you. Moving forward, Andy coined this great phrase when we were having the discussion about how we move these projects forward. Building coalitions with capital. Understanding how we can match funders and the sustainable business models that we've both developed and uncovered to match the medium-term interests of local authorities and their stakeholders. That's how we need to move forward. And importantly, we need to start to account for all different dimensions of value. So understanding who can create each different type of values: social value, economic value, financial value. There's no point asking PricewaterhouseCoopers to create social value. It's not their job. Their job is to create financial value for the stakeholders. However, the regulator, it's their job to create social value by introducing the policy and the regulation that, if you like, converts between financial value and social value and vice versa. So understanding who's in charge of creating each type of value is important. And regulation is about value conversion. Regulation is about allowing you to convert between different dimensions of value, allowing you to convert environmental value into financial value and vice versa. And very importantly, it's about preserving, reinvesting and recycling value locally. This is the key mantra of iBUILD. It's about not allowing value to dissipate out of your local system into international systems of finance or international systems of social deprivation. It's about allowing you to keep that value locally and finding the mechanisms that allow you to keep it, allow you to recycle it, allow you to reinvest it. And that's, I think, the things that we can begin to help with. I wrote down soft infrastructure in response to something that somebody wrote, but now I can't remember what it is, so we will move swiftly on. Do we have some copies of the manifesto? Richard, can you confirm or deny that there? We do, Claire confirms. We have some copies of the manifesto. So we wrote this a couple of years ago as a sort of manifesto for iBUILD. It has a number of points. I've highlighted the fifth one. The way we get this stuff from where it is now out into the real world is through practical action and demonstration. We are past the point of academic theorising. We are past the point of co-creation. We are at the point now where we need to get this out into the wild. And so we are beginning to work on the final programme of events for iBUILD and the related projects, which allow us to actually say, here's the business model, here's the value generation, and look, here's it working in practice. Here's a local council that have retained local value. Here's a local council that haven't been forced to sell off either their infrastructure assets or their building assets, and so on and so forth. So in July there'll be a workshop for local authorities on funding and finance, and then a manual for infrastructure business models has been proposed by the iBUILD team. We hope to get that out soon. The final iBUILD event should be around about February 2018, and there'll be more local and national events, not just in iBUILD but in all the related projects too. So essentially all I'm saying is keep in touch, because there's an awful lot more to come out of this space. Now you can go for caffeine. Thank you very much for your kind attention.